places you can.
Networking to uplift each other in all areas of life. Hello, this is Dr. Wilise Richey, and I'm broadcasting to you from sunny St. Augustine, Florida. We are on Blog Talk Radio, and welcome to Maslow Women Live.
Hello, everyone. It's a beautiful day in Florida. We're in St. Augustine, Florida, broadcasting to you live. Our topic today is the second installment of our Ethnic in America series, which started with the Trayvon Martin story and continues today with institutional racism. I'd like to introduce our panel. Our panel includes today Joe Grant.
Hello, everyone.
Audra Craig Walker.
Hello, everyone.
And Dude Man is joining us today. Dude Man, are you on?
I'm here.
Okay. And we're awaiting an additional panelist that will be Byron Franklin, who is a little late in joining us, but we'll hold off until he gets on. So how's everybody today?
Doing wonderful. How about yourself?
Doing wonderful. I'm doing good. What about you, Audra? How are things going with you?
Oh, everything's going well. Enjoying the weather.
Enjoying the weather.
Summer's approaching us. Spring is on doing its thing, so everything's moving forward well.
Mhm. Do you have any plans for the summer?
Other than my son spending some quality time with some close relatives and giving me a break, and maybe doing a little traveling in state, taking a few vacations.
Mhm. What about you, Joe? Any plans?
Not really. I guess other than graduation, nothing major. I do have a few trips planned here in Florida, to Orlando next month, and then hopefully the month after, my first time actually going to South Beach in Miami. So I'm excited.
Mhm. So, Dude Man, did you have to get permission today to be on the show?
No, the wife is gone. They went to church today, so they left Dude Man alone.
They went to church, so they left alone. What's the weather like over there? Is it good?
It's raining where Dude Man is.
Oh,
Pouring down rain.
Wow, we don't have the rain. We don't have the rain today. Well, we'll allow Byron Franklin, that's our guest panelist, to have a little more time to come on in. But going back to our subject, institutional racism, there are, frankly, I don't think that that term is a mainstay or a household term in the general public. What do you think? Do you think that people really understand what that is, or if that actually exists?
I feel that it depends upon, a lot of times, the environment you were brought up in, as well as the generation. I believe younger people in the different generations do not have the same outlook and perspective as middle-aged or older Americans.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, we have Byron on the line right now. Byron Franklin, he is our guest panelist. And how are you, Byron?
Okay.
We're holding off a little bit, waiting on you to get back online with us. Okay. We just got through just having just a little chat here and there, see how everyone's doing, and just getting us kind of warmed up and kind of laid back so that we can openly discuss institutional racism in America. I just got through asking if we think that institutional racism is like a household word in America. As
well,
I asked you,
in my opinion, what I've seen is a ramping up of not only overt, non-institutional, in-your-face racism, but also institutionalized racism since Barack Obama became president. And the reason I say that is that I've seen there's been quite a backlash. I was quite, when he was elected the first African American president, I knew that, maybe some people would be in opposition, but since he had such support during the election, I didn't think that it would have been as severe as it has been. The name calling, the insulting, the disrespecting, and he's the president. So everybody else, every other African American, we're going to take it on the chin even more than him. So, for instance,
and that's the reason why. And that's the reason why it's important to have a discussion like this today. Well, I want to just start us off by reading a quote, definition quote, and a few comments given by an anti-racism initiative, which is a nonprofit organization that deals with building communities to end poverty, and it's called the Solid Ground. And basically, they define institutional racism as the systemic distribution of resources, power, and opportunity in our society to the benefit of people who are white and the exclusion of people of color. And that's a direct quote. They continue on to explain that present-day racism was built on long-term history of racially distributed resources. Someone has some feedback going on in the background. So I'm going to start again. The statement was, present-day racism was built on a long history of racially distributed resources and ideas that shape our view of ourselves and others. It is a hierarchical system that comes with a broad range of policies and institutions that keep this in place. In the United States, institutional racism has been responsible for slavery, settlement, Indian reservations, segregation, residential schools, quote, for American Indians, and internment camps. While most of these institutions no longer exist, they have long-term impact on our society. As a result of institutional racism, racial stratification and disparities have occurred in employment, housing, education, healthcare, government, and other sectors. While many laws were passed since the mid-20th century to make discrimination illegal, major inequities still exist. Institutional racism is distinguished from bigotry or racial bias of individuals by the experience of a systemic policy and practice within institutions that effectually disadvantage certain racial or ethnic groups. That is their account of what institutional racism is.
Where was that from?
That was from a group called the Solid Ground. They're an anti-racism initiative that works with
Solid Ground.
It's called Solid Ground. You just click Solid Ground in your internet browser, and they should come up immediately.
Yes,
if you want to look them up.
Very good definition. Very, very inclusive.
Okay, so I had asked you, Byron, if you would, as a professor, you do dabble in this subject with your students, and I would like to ask you to give us an overview of what the history. How did this come about? How did this form itself? Because just like we make conscious decisions to, let's start a business, let's form a company. This doesn't sound like it's something that just evolved.
Correct. Well, I teach a course called Race and the Law at University of Baltimore School of Law, also at Coppin State University, both in Maryland. And what I do is I start off the class. It's a law class. But I start off talking about the history of race itself, and how a scientist named Carl von Linnaeus basically invented race in the 1700s. He practiced in taxonomy, which is the classification of plants, and he basically started to classify people as he did plants, so basing characteristics after their color. So basically, he would say the Indian was red. He was a tribal, and they would attribute characteristics to color. Black people were negligent, lazy, stupid. Whites were brave, cunning, intelligent, courageous. Yellow people were melancholy and uncourageous. These were the terms, and if you look at some old encyclopedias, they had, he had the Mongoloid race was the basically Asians, the Caucasoid race was the whites, and the Negroid race was the blacks, and they would have different face structure and different bone structure, and this is encyclopedias. I have encyclopedias that I got in the 1970s that still have this in there. But basically, it was to justify slavery at that point, and where they got that information was basically from missionaries who had been going to Africa. They weren't scientists or anything. They just saw people, even though they evolved from them. We're talking about the 1700s, 1600s, 1700s, and basically they gave information to the scientists in Europe, and that's how basically race came up. So there's no anthropological, biological, scientific. It's bunk. It's not. It has no basis, but it's become a social construct that has controlled our lives for over 400 years. That's something that's not even real. There's only one race, Homo sapiens. It's a human race, and now with DNA, they've been able to detect that. Of course, we know that all life came out of the first human came out of Africa, the first Homo sapien, and migrated to different parts of the world. After thousands of years of assimilation to a certain environment, you change different characteristics, and that's how race. That's why people look different in other places. They're not different races.
And I want to add to that the characteristics that were evolved over time as a response to nature, with the migration of the Homo sapien, those characteristics were there for the survival of the race. It wasn't there for the supremacy building of, the others, the future race, the future Homo sapiens.
Correct. And also, as racism started to increase, the conquerors such as Napoleon and people of that nature, they would come into Africa, and of course, part of conquering a people is to rape the women. So, what would happen? They would, go into African villages, what have you, different parts of the country, rape the women, then come back, and then they would come back years later, or however long they come back, and they would see that the kids looked black. So, a lot of that. Also, that caused, now you had a kind of insecurity based on the Caucasian race, who was basically superior in their minds, but actually had a fear. So that's why you've heard the stories of Napoleon blowing the noses off of the sphinxes in Egypt, just to kind of get to take away all traces of the original people, and if to not give anyone any inkling that the first man was actually a black African. And then,
so
yes.
So,
Let me, and somebody else could go ahead.
Well, we'll come back to you in a second because you still need to give us an overview of the history of the creation of this phenomenon.
Right. But I think John wanted to say something.
Joe, yeah.
Joe.
Yeah, I wanted to see, was there, upon conducting the research, were there any things brought about as far as why Caucasians seem to be more prominent than any other race, or why were they considered to be such icons? If that's a, was there anything showing,
in actuality, at that time, basically you have to, if you go back to ancient Africa, all medicine, science, mathematics, irrigation, education, all invented in different parts of Africa. When the Greek, that's 27 dynasties. You're talking thousands of years. Then the Greeks conquered Egypt, parts of Africa, took all of that information. Then the Romans came into prominence and took from the Greeks. Then the British came into prominence, and then you have basically America. So the English language, customs, everything, what have you, the math that we study, the science that we know, all has its basis. The farming that we do, the medicine that we do, the astronomy, all has its basis in different parts of Africa. The first university was in Timbuktu, and basically, you've always had people that have known this. So maybe not the masses of people, but your prominent scholars and over the years have known all of this information. It basically became profit-based about slavery. It became sanctioned. The Catholic Church sanctioned it. The first slave ship was called the Good Ship Jesus, and basically it was a commodity. In 1555, it was a commodity, and in order to enslave a people, you have to make them seem inferior or inhuman or part animal to justify it to yourself.
I agree.
So basically, that's how that happened. So I mean, it's and for people to be subjugated to that, you couldn't do the torture and the murder of individuals without if you thought that they were equal to you. So it was a construct put together by the European at this time for capitalist reasons, kind of the same reason everything else seems to be happening nowadays also, but added in with the whole institution of racism. So that's basically yes.
It was a conditioning, a learned helplessness conditioning, such that Skinner describes in his experiments. And learned helplessness is a psychological term describing a person, animal that can learn to be helpless. One of the examples is if you look in the zoo, you'll see that the elephants, even when they're young and very young, they're not as strong as if they're full grown. So they'll keep them tied. One leg will be tied to a chain, and they, when they're little, they try to get away, but they never can get away because they're not strong enough to break that chain. So as they get bigger, they have already learned that they can't get away. So even if you were to replace the chain with a string, they still would not get away, even though they're so big that they've stopped trying. They've learned to stop trying because they've rendered themselves, or view themselves, perceive themselves as helpless, and that they must remain where they are.
Well, yes, that is true. But I would say that if you just take let's just look at the strides and the accomplishments that blacks have had, despite all of this racism, means they've never stopped trying. So I said, if you bar a bolted door, they'll dig a hole under that door to get to the other side. They'll always find another way because it's human nature to be free, to use one's mind, and to flourish. That's human nature. Those are gifts
and survive.
To the rights of all of us when we were born. So that's why we're still not slaves today, because it's been a fight every step of the way. None of the laws that you see in place now were just changed because someone felt benevolent about it. People died.
Right.
People died.
Do you have anything to say about that? About none of the laws were changed, just because of compassion or guilt.
Not at all.
Consciences.
And that's why, if you saw I was shocked when I saw Condoleezza Rice. She was on Meet the Press one day, and I guess this ties into institutionalized kind of racism, where this one that Tim Russert was still on there. He asked her, basically, because she is a Republican, she's conservative, and put that in quotes. Said, what did you think of the civil rights movement? Now, she's from Alabama. She said, basically, I think everything would have just happened eventually. I don't think it was really necessary. I think Clarence Thomas said the same exact thing. He also said, you're opposed to affirmative action, which was a program put together after Martin Luther King passed and with the help of Lyndon Johnson, President Lyndon Johnson, who signed the Civil Rights Act, to counter years and years and years of mistreatment, miseducation. Remember, it was illegal for blacks to go to school. Affirmative action was a way to reverse that institutionalized racism, and she benefited from it when she went to college. I believe she went to Stanford or wherever she went. So he goes, Tim Russert asked Condoleezza Rice, you benefited from affirmative action. She said, yes, I did. He said, but you're against it. She said, yes, I am. He said, how can you be against it and you benefited from it? He said, well, I don't think it's necessary anymore, blah, 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 blah. So I think institutionalized racism has also turned people against each other who are in the same predicament, where you have some groups of people who, I guess, want to escape that racism so bad that they'll turn their back on their own people.
So how historically, how do you explain how this system was set in place?
The system was put in place through law, and it got more. Believe it or not, at the beginning of this is before even 1776. Slavery was still in place. Was already in place, big time. Different states had laws, but they actually increased. So actually, slaves had actual certain kinds of rights before. And as time went on, the laws tightened to be more oppressive. And Virginia was one of the main states who had some of the worst slave laws, repressive laws. I mean, you're counting everything. You couldn't own property. First of all, you were considered 3/5 a human being. Again, these were all things made up. they knew they were making them up, but they were to justify their ends. They were the means for them to for the Europeans, the slave traders, to make a fortune. And basically, slavery made America rich. It made the Industrial Revolution come about. So the historical way that the institutionalization was put in place was through laws, through slavery. Then after the Civil War, you had the slave codes, because they had to keep them, but they weren't. Pardon?
What were the slave codes?
Slave codes after. Well, the slave codes were before the Civil War. Then they had the black codes after the Civil War. The slave codes were different. If a slave was caught escaping here, if anyone was caught helping a slave or caught teaching a slave, they would be punished under the law. These were all laws, and that deterred a lot of whites who maybe might have wanted to help. Because the first protest against slavery, the first recorded protest against slavery was in the 1600s. The Quakers in Pennsylvania, they actually wrote up a document in protest of slavery, and they were against it. So the fact that you'll hear sometimes people say, well, that was just the way it was back then. Like, no, that wasn't the way it was back then, because there were a lot of people that were against it. And those Quakers went on to become abolitionists, and they basically formed some of the first schools. Of course, these were secret schools where they were teaching slaves to read, to write, what have you. And as a matter of fact, Barack Obama's kids go to a school called Sidwell Friends, was actually one of those original Quaker schools that illegally taught blacks. So there were, you had, of course, we know about John Brown. There were people who were in opposition, but again, slavery was making so much money, just like the prison industrial complex is making money now, that they didn't care what they said, and obviously slavery continued on full speed ahead, and then of course post slavery, many things happened at that time as well.
Does anybody have anything to interject at this point?
What did you say?
So, does anyone have anything to interject?
Yes, somebody else get in there. Joe, how do you feel about this journey?
Well, I had a question for Byron. In reference to racism, in your opinion, your professional opinion, is racism basically due to economics? Is it pretty much, we pull everything down if that could be done? Is it simply a matter of economics for the oppression and the different laws being put?
I'm glad you asked that. And, that's, if it was just simply economics, then once blacks became economically viable, then the racism would be gone. But that's not the case. Now, I like to pull this. I like to read this to my class because it was in my constitutional law book when I was in law school, and they were talking about post-slavery. Now, this is in 1907 on the floor of the. It's a senator. It was a senator who said this on the floor of the House of Representatives Congress in 1907. But it talks about what happened in the 1880s, and I'll get into that here. It said racial conservatives ruling again in the 1880s built their power in part upon the assumption that the Negro would remain in the South and that he would be willingly and harmoniously subordinate. They resisted strenuously both attempts in the 1880s to raise blacks substantially higher in the scale of white civilization and efforts in the 1890s to exclude them altogether. In the late 1880s on through the 1890s, caught in a depression in which opportunities for everyone diminished with sickening rapidity, racial conservatives found themselves losing power and fighting for survival. Now, let me just say, within 10 years after the Civil War, blacks had gained the equal amount of education level as white Americans on average. As if you remember, at that time, many whites were not educated either. And they had a right to be, but they weren't. So blacks built their own schools. See, what happened was after the Civil War, whites became very nervous. They formed the NRA, the Ku Klux Klan formed 2 years after the Civil War ended. And then the NRA, the National Rifle Association, formed 3 years after the Civil War. And the first law that they lobbied Congress was to make it illegal for a black person to own a gun. And the reason being, they were definitely scared that blacks were going to spend their time taking revenge out and killing all the white people, which is, they did the exact opposite. They went and looked for their families, built schools, built businesses and into the Reconstruction period. So let me continue. Racialism appeared in strength in 1889 and spread rapidly through the South. The core of the radical mentality was the concept that Negroes, freed from the restraining influences of slavery, were rapidly retrogressing towards their natural state of bestiality. Ultimately, radicals believed there would be no place for blacks in the South or in America. The assault upon idealized Southern womanhood by the nigger beast was the keen cutting edge of radicalism. Let Benjamin Ryan Tillman of South Carolina catch the scene for us, as he did for his colleagues on the floor of the United States Senate in 1907. As he drew the picture, white women in the rural South were virtually besieged by Negro brutes who roamed almost without restraint, their breasts pulsating with desire to sate their passions upon white maidens and wives. Rapes and the lynchings that followed became the special studies of the radicals and provided the most vital of their statistics. It is vastly significant that the lynching of black men for the rape of white women was not the subject of intense observation and comment in the South before 1889. In and after 1889, however, that crime and its punishment commanded a new and tremendously magnified attention. Violence and the great threat of violence was one way in which the radicals sought to lower the self-esteem of blacks and thus render them more controllable on the way to their demise. But there were other, more subtle means to effect that end. Two of the tools used to reduce and hence manage blacks were disenfranchisement and segregation. And this final paragraph, radicalism had a special motive in its efforts to pass laws to disenfranchise black men and to separate the races in public places, one that was distinctly different from the special motive of conservatism in the same process. The radical motive was to depress the expectations of blacks, especially black men, to make them less secure and ultimately less aggressive, to lead them to follow with minimal resistance the inevitable path to racial extinction. Radicals readily recognized that blacks were already practically disenfranchised and segregated, but to radicals, the laws were useful in showing explicitly and blatantly the power of whites. They were tokens of hard and present truths and signs of things to come, of the surety of white supremacy and the futility of black resistance. So I'll never forget reading that when I was in law school, and it put it all in a capsule. I just understood everything just with that little part. So it just wasn't about. It wasn't as to answer your question. Who your name? Whose question? Who was I just speaking to?
Audra.
Right. To answer your question, it wasn't just about money and power. It was also about sexual repression and insecurity, inferiority that the white woman would take to the black man. And in one way, what that would do, of course, to them would diminish their race, which is what you hear, racial purity. Even though there's no such thing, that's all you hear. Not just the Ku Klux Klan, but they just say it in a more overt way. Basically, it's a fact of keeping black men weak so that white women won't find them attractive. So I mean, that was part. I mean, that's what I got out of that. I got out of that paragraph was not just about the racism was institutionalized. That was included too, even though half the time we're not even looking at them.
Susan, sounds like you. Go ahead, Audra.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, real quick, Byron. Excuse me. I read a lot of different types of books and things on this issue, and it's really a pleasure to speak with you. You're so knowledgeable. So I have two questions to throw at you, and just answer them however, whatever your level of comfort is. First of all, I would assume from what you're saying that you do not believe we are currently living in a post-racial era. Do you agree with that or disagree? Do you think we are?
Can you repeat the question?
Are we currently living in, with the election of, you mentioned President Obama, and I agree with a lot of the different things that you shared in reference to how the backlash for others, blacks in general or black professionals, from that, considering everything that you shared, do you feel that we're living in a post-racial era at this time?
That name, that was something that was being used during the election for about a day or two after.
Okay.
Because after Barack Obama was elected, all hell broke loose. I mean, it was even amazing to me, and I studied the subject. So after any type of large black advancement, you have a severe backlash, and that's why it's important, I think, to have these discussions now, so that black people or people of color in general don't get caught sleeping and have the clock reversed on them, because that's exactly what happened. After slavery, the Ku Klux Klan came about, and the NRA, to try to turn back the clock. Then after Reconstruction, that's in the early 1900s when most of your black school HBCUs were born. That's when the fraternities and sororities were invented. That was the Black Renaissance in Harlem. That was a term, black advancement. Then you had segregation, and then you had the incidents like in Rosewood. I don't know if everyone remember that movie, Rosewood.
Right.
Oh, yes.
Like in Rosewood, Florida, and in Tulsa, Oklahoma, they called Black Wall Street, where whites went into black during the time of Rosewood in the early 1900s. Percentage-wise, there were more black-owned businesses in America than there are today, because you had to have a black-owned business. If you were doing any business, it had to be black. Black people could only go to black-owned businesses. So,
because of segregation,
Right. So, at that point, that was the segregation, and Jim Crow was the response. Then, after the Board of Education passed Brown versus Board of Education, and the Civil Rights Movement and everything came about, the backlash to that was basically the new Ronald Reagan on the war. Well, I started with Nixon, the war on crime and war on drugs, war on poverty, which were all a smokescreen, where they were saying now the big problem is the Negro in the ghetto that's causing all the problems in America, and then the Ronald Reagan Revolution of the Republican Revolution, when basically at that point actually racism had subsided, blacks had gotten a lot of opportunities institutionally. Jimmy Carter did a lot, Lyndon Johnson did a lot. Believe it or not, even Nixon did a few things, believe it or not. A lot of different things where now you had blacks going to Ivy League schools, working at companies that he never worked at before, going to law school in large numbers, being integrated into society. Ronald Reagan came in with a direct assault upon that. He wanted to turn the clock back on black advancement.
Wow.
Then, after the Clinton era, the backlash was the Bush administration, because from 1992 to 2000, the largest increase, and I don't know where you guys were, but from 1992 to 2000, the largest amount of increase in income and employment was in the black community. That was during the Clinton administration. Even more than whites, blacks' incomes rose, and by the year 2000, the employment rate, meaning the percentage that blacks are employed, the percentage amount of blacks are employed as opposed to black people, was almost statistically equal to the percentage of whites that were employed. So the percentage of employment was almost equal. So we were bridging into the 21st century and figured that we weren't going to look back. So of course, the backlash against that was the Bush administration. They took the deficit, they cut programs, they went to war. Black people got hurt the most with the economy. Basically, they turned the clock back again. Then we have with the election, the last backlash. Now we have after the election of Barack Obama. The backlash to me is just overt. I mean, to me, it's institutionalized, kind of stays the same because people are basically breaking the law when they you can get sued for institutionalized racism now. There's laws against it. There's laws everywhere against it, and that's why you see constant lawsuits going on all the time. What I see now, the backlash is overt racism, and the reason I say that is that Barack Obama, he's the president, and regardless, you say, well, he's the president, he's the figurehead, whatever, he is the top man. So basically, you have to be overt with your racism, because if you're covert, nobody's going to hear you.
Right, exactly. Well, thank you for that history, Byron.
Yes.
A lot of interesting points, and a lot of things you enlightened me on. A lot of key moves that were made along history's time. I'd like to delve into. I know that our panel does have some examples. I have some examples, or my panel has some examples of some issues that reflect institutional racism in the media.
Hello.
So I don't know who needs to start, who wants to start. Joe,
yeah.
Man, you've been really quiet. Are you still there? Are you still with us?
Dude Man is here, but Dude Man ain't happy with white folk. Never have been happy with white folk. And listen to the professor talk, it just really got me a little fired up, and I had to put myself on a 25-second delay button so I wouldn't say anything that would offend anybody. But to me, and I know the panelists have done their research, but to me, from my standpoint, I heard the professor talk, and I'm impressed with his history. But to me, the whole thing starts off with the Dred Scott case, and it starts with blacks aren't citizens. Then we move down the road to the Plessy versus Ferguson, and then they say segregation is constitutional. And to me, I'm not trying to be funny. Anything and everything that black folk in this country have had to go and get, we had to run to the court system to force somebody's hand, and that only forced their hand on paper. Didn't mean it changed the way their hearts thought about it. They still hated the hell out of us, but it forced their hands on paper, and it made them go underground. So I look at it from a standpoint of, and I hate to say it this way because I'm generalizing, and I know there's some good white people out there, but it's almost like white people got to be the most ungodly folk you ever got to encounter. They have no compassion. And it seems as if, to me, what should have happened out of the sake of compassion would have been they pay taxes like we do. In fact, we had to pay a poll tax. The professor probably knows about that. But yet still paying a poll tax and forcing us to read and all this other stuff, they still took advantage of us. Because back in slavery time, Some slaves had to pay a tax because they let them go out to work. You paid a tax, but you couldn't do nothing else. So I think when we fast forward to where we are today, I don't think not much has changed. I was reading an article, because I know you sent me this thing a while back, about today's institutional racism. I know we're not going to cover everything, but it's John Derbyshire. He wrote this article called The Talk, the non-black version. And he got down, and I don't know why they fired the white guy. He just told the truth. Because one of the things that he says is that white folks are to scrutinize black politicians' character more so than the white guy. And you know, and that's true. And the other thing I thought that was so true about his article was, I think he called them intellectually acceptable blacks. And it's almost like intellectually sociable acceptable blacks. I think that's what he called them. And you pick one and he's your friend, and that's like your interference for people to say you're prejudiced. No, I got this black friend over here. So from Dude Man's perspective from the street, I don't see how much has changed from the days of slavery to now. We've just simply become a different form of slave, although we enjoy the fruits of work, and we can now buy property. Because I looked at my deed. I got a deed to my property, and my deed to my property in 1972 said that they could not sell it to any non-blacks or non-Christian people. And so when I saw that, it made me scratch my head. I said, gee, in 72, that's in my lifetime. So I'm saying, I think they've allowed us some semblance of freedom. And as the professor said, when the president got elected, it's like shit hit the fan. They just went crazy. It's like they lost their mind. They literally decided, we're going to clamp everything down. So my thought has been, you know, they're just literally livid at the fact that this mulatto fella got in there. They're livid. Right. Then again, that's why Lincoln freed the slaves. He was afraid there was going to be a mulatto nation taking over. He can't have this shit. So,
and can I just say something about that too? What Joe just said, it's so true. Is that, you know,
Byron, that was good, man. Joe's going to chime in after you say what you're going to say. That was good, man.
I just want to comment on just that last point he was just saying about Barack Obama having a one side of his family being white. Is that I remember saying to some people, I said, well, geez, Obama has a white mama, and that doesn't even matter. He's the end president. They call him all type of stuff. Then my friend pointed out to me. He said, "Wait a minute." He said, during slavery,
one drop.
During slavery, when the slave master raped the black female slave, that child became a slave. He said they were enslaving their own children. Right. So for them to treat Barack Obama like that, it's no big deal. I just want to make that point. Go ahead.
It's that one drop rule. He got one drop. It's the one drop rule. He got one drop, so you a nigga. I don't care what you are. So I say that to say this. I don't care how far we go educational-wise, you're still a nigga when they cut the lights off. They don't care. And I hate to use that word, but they really don't care. And it's time, to me, from the streets, for black folk to come together and stop being jealous of each other because I got and you don't got. It's that whole Machiavellian kind of thing. You pit one against the other. It's crap. You know, I got some friends from Britain that live here. I got some friends from the Caribbean that live here. And, you know, they come at it from a different point of view. Black folks challenge them on a regular basis because they don't think they're black enough, because they're friends with white people. Their society is different. And I'm going to say this and shut up because I know everybody's got something to say. But my thing is, if I go to Europe today, I will not find a Hitler holiday. I will not find an Auschwitz Boulevard. I will not find a concentration camp subdivision. I will not find anybody celebrating Nazi Nazi Day, but in America, in Georgia, in South Carolina, and I think in Virginia, they celebrate Confederate Memorial Day. You have streets called Robert E. Lee Drive. You have Confederate Avenue. You have Plantation Drive, Plantation Subdivision.
Stonewall Jackson High School.
There you go.
Baltimore.
Right,
So
right.
we've not
Columbus
dealt.
Day.
We're still disrespected as a race.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm shutting up on that note.
Well, I agree. I agree with a vast majority of the comments that Dude Man made in regards to how we're still being per se ruled or allowed to do certain things and live a certain way. I do agree with that because majority of the research and statistics I found has shown that blacks has always been at a loss, pretty much, regardless of, just like you say, the education we have, the job we may uphold, and the guest speaker also made a valid point to when he said that you're willing to turn against your own race in order to, using the example of Condoleezza Rice. So, I mean, in the information I found, I mean, it's pretty much reflective of what they both said. And I wanted to hit a few key points, if I could, just a few minutes, regarding a few examples of institutional racism, which the report states is still going strong even today. A few examples they used was the segment of income. In this segment here or section, it states that though minorities registered considerably increases in average household incomes during the 1990s, in 1999, the racial ethnic gaps were still huge. As far as income is concerned, it was about per capita income was about $29,000 for whites. You had for African Americans about 15, which is almost half if you round that. For Latinos, it was about 12,000. Native Americans, they tapped right above African Americans, about 16. And then you had your Asian Americans with about 24. And the Illinois Department of Labor statistics show that when you remove the highest income levels from the averages, the gaps were even wider, with blacks, Latinos, and Native American workers being the worst off, which is still prevalent today. Unemployment. This was another section that the article focused on. And it states communities of color experience unemployment rates almost twice of that of whites. This is held true through the 1990s, in spite of an overall decrease in unemployment. In Chicago, the official unemployment rate for persons of color was 11.5%, but 3.3% for whites. And of course, in today's economic crisis, we can also see those numbers, pretty much reflective of even back then in the 1990s. Housing, according to the Acorn study, you need it.
Mhm.
Yeah, according to the Acorn study that was done in 2001, African Americans were denied mortgages 5 times more often than whites, while Latino. Yeah,
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
While Latinos were turned down 2.5 times more than whites. Although there was a considerable increase in minority home ownership during the 1990s, African Americans and Latinos tend to live in housing that is much older and worth far less than that of whites. Okay. Education section. This is one that kind of got me on the edge here. And it was speaking that African American and Latino students have a much higher school dropout rate, which, of course, is another valid statistical we can actually prove this. White students score far higher than African Americans and Latino students on state-required standardized tests. And, of course, when I read that, it took me right back to when I was in high school, to the amount of resources that was available to us. We didn't have everything. It was a lot of things that would hand me down. It was a lot of books that your professor or instructor may tell you to turn to page 32 through 36 is torn out of the book. So it was a lot of things that we did not have. And because of the lack of resources, it's why these statistics are so have such a valid, point or are so evident. Even now today, we see this. Although African Americans are less than 20% of the population of Chicago metropolitan area, they constitute more than half of the homeless individuals in that population, which is another alarming statistic there. They even went as far as to the health and health care, about how African Americans cancel the mortality rate of cancer, the death rates of the diabetes and heart disease, HIV and AIDS. All of these diseases are so prevalent in blacks because of the lack of resources, because of the lack of unemployment, etc. We're not able to do as much for ourselves as we would if we had that job. And one of the last sections I wanted to hit was the criminal justice, and I'm pretty sure the guest speaker kind of chime in on this one. And it states here it's a more shocking statistics. African Americans and Latinos have a disproportionate rate of victimization by crime. In specific areas of drug arrests, African Americans have a far higher arrest rate, although reliable statistics show drug use to be much higher among whites. And actually, I recently seen a study. I forget the show, but they did an undercover kind of drug sting, and they were serving the majority of the blue-collar and white-collar white Americans, the people who are performing surgeries on you, the people who are representing you in court. These people
who are flying your planes.
Yes. It also shows that whites are 125% more likely to use marijuana, 181% more likely to use cocaine, and 413% more likely to abuse inhalants, and 516% more likely to abuse LSD than that of African Americans or Latinos. Okay, so that was kind of what that report was kind of showing. But all in all, just to summarize it, it pretty much was going back to what Duman said. It has always kind of sort of been a loss within the African community or minorities to say, and I guess my question to the panel is, how do we change that, or how do the phase change? What needs to happen?
Well, the statistics that you brought up, Joe, reminds me of something someone shared with me, and he shared it with me because someone else shared it with him. He quoted the white people basically say that numbers lie, and we lie in numbers. Lie means lying. So those statistics don't sound like that they're lying, because they seem reflective of what's actually what we're feeling and what we're witnessing in society today.
Right.
So I thank you for those statistics, because I don't think that we can hear them enough, especially those folks that don't want to have to deal with this issue. This issue is not a non-issue. You're bathing in it. You're swimming in it every single day. And I don't think that those statistics, if people don't hear them often enough, if we don't become a voice that is just as mainstream, just like, Glee, it has to be that people are so aware that it just can't just slip between the cracks. Because one of the reasons, and I'm going to go back to what Byron was saying and what Dude Man was saying about President Obama, one of the reasons why there's backlash is because somebody forgot or fell asleep on the watch. There was a crack in the institutional racism dam, and one of them got through. That's why the backlash is happening. So we need to repair that dam, and we need to make it stronger so no other gets through.
Right. I agree.
Definitely.
I agree. And it's starting with the re-election of President Obama.
It started during that. And it was so funny. Before the election, you couldn't get the news to talk about race. The mainstream media, they wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. I mean, it was almost like they go, it's a colorblind society, meaning I don't even see you. That's what colorblind meant to me. I'm blind to your color, not in a good way. So it was so funny to see the switch. As soon as he started running, they said, okay, President Obama does this well with middle-aged white rural voters, does this way with elderly black city voters. They were splitting everything up with black, white, Latino according to race. And it was so telling to me. I said, I'm saying to myself, I thought it wasn't a big deal. I thought it didn't exist anymore. When actuality it existed in a big way. And the reason I say now institutionalized racism is kind of like covert. Now you have the new voter ID laws. I don't know if anyone knows them, and make sure that whatever state you live in that you're able to vote. They've been overturned in some laws, but these are basically Jim Crow laws that they put back in certain states that Republicans put in to stop blacks from voting, to stop blacks, college students, which usually vote Democrat, and the elderly. But it disproportionately affects blacks where, especially for the elderly, you have to have a birth certificate. A lot of people don't have birth certificates. I have aunts. I mean, if you're over 80 years old and lived in a certain place or something like, black people didn't get birth certificates. So to have to go and get that, to do all that stuff when in other states you can have a gun permit can be used as proper ID. I mean, all this stuff is a turn back to the Jim Crow laws that before the Voting Rights Act, and they're being struck down because they're unconstitutional, but it takes time to strike them down. So you got to understand is that the law, just because you have laws doesn't mean they're not going to try to break them. They'll break the laws, and they don't care. Their end is to justify their immediate means. So if the law doesn't get overturned in the state by November, you go in and you're not allowed to vote. That's all they care about, because it's about preventing people from voting. Because now, as we go into as the years go on, we just saw for the first year, 2011 was the first year that more black babies were born than white babies in the United States. Babies of color, let's put it that way. It might be Latino, but if you're of color, you could be Latino, you could be black, you could be a lot of things. So that was for the first time. And I think where you see the institutionalized racism, to me it's more overt, is that's why you see the Republicans and corporations taking over. They want to stop Social Security. They want to stop labor unions. They want to stop pensions. They want to stop unemployment insurance. They want to stop Medicare. They want to stop public schools. All of the things that were put into place to get an even playing field for us to get to where we are today, they're trying to turn the clock back. And the fact that they can't turn it back the way they used to, because you have a black president. This has never happened before. And I don't care. Barack Obama could come out with a Confederate flag T-shirt saying "Down with the Negroes." They still wouldn't care, because
the bottom line is
it's the symbolism. Yes.
sorry. The bottom line is that it's not. It's all the programs that are in place still doesn't create an equal playing field. It doesn't.
Right.
It doesn't make up for any disparities. It doesn't make up because most folks are starting off at a disadvantage to begin with. So even those programs that are set in place are not equalizing the playing field. What's more, on top of not having that equal play field, we have covert, manipulative behavior to ensure that you don't take advantage of these programs and these things that are set in place to help you get a leg up. Okay, I mentioned to a friend of mine this week. He was telling me about an incident that occurred, and it was basically a white person making an allegation against a black person, and the white person's word was taken above the black person's. And after discussing the whole issue and all the details of that issue, I felt, what, I don't ever recall, and the statement that I made was that I don't even know what it feels like to be taken on face value just because of my color. Okay? This white woman is taken at face value, whether she's presenting the truth, whether she's presenting a lie, whatever she says, her color vouches for her. Any comments on that?
That's the problem. Well, back up to what you're saying, there's some buzzwords out there that we got to sort of understand is going on. Buzzwords: credibility, secure our borders, liberal,
take our country back.
All those are buzzwords, whether it's a positive or a negative racial connotation. All those words have protecting America. All those words have that connotation of waving that white flag. And I think that there's a problem when you're talking about instant credibility by virtue of birthright. But all of that plays into those quote unquote those little buzzwords that we have to deal with. States' rights. Let's let the states decide. That's that code word for us. Arrogant, articulate, uppity. That's a funny word for us. Right. Socialist, Marxist. White folks wouldn't know a socialist to slap them in their face. Because we live in a socialist society, basically. I'm saying that to say not to diminish what you said about the instant credibility. I think everybody right now in this little circle, we've all experienced that credibility issue. Even if we got a speeding ticket and a white officer pulls us over, forget the fact that you weren't speeding. If he or she says you were speeding, damn it, you were speeding. Yeah. And don't let them be white. It's just automatic. So I'm shutting up on that. I'm going to be nice from now.
Well, I agree. If you want to talk about the birther movement, is basically what you're saying would be, I was surprised to see some black people believe in this stuff. That's what really hurts me, is that after all we went through, we have, and I'm sorry to say, I have some students that think like that, and of course you see them on TV, a lot of blacks that have been their brains have been wiped clean, and they are full hook, line, and sinker for the propaganda that's put up against them. But if you look at the whole birth of Obama's not an American, that's what yesterday was Malcolm X's birthday. That's what he was saying. He was like, they do not consider you an American. Stop, and for the first time, a lot of black people, when Barack Obama, the reason people were so happy, no matter, and of course he hadn't done anything yet. The reason people were so happy was because I saw some black people even hanging flags outside of their houses for the first time. You never saw any people waving a flag having flag black in the black neighborhood. And it was the first time I've seen that, because they said, you know what, I think that we might be able to finally say that. And then as Joe and everyone said, that everything hit the fan, and you've had an institutionalized and an overt, and to be unaware that that's going on now. If you're black, and if this doesn't show you, because you got the top man, if the president is being treated like this, how do you think they feel about you? You know, so and again, but I will say on the flip side of this, there's something positive within this, is that I see more unity in the black community. It used to be the divide and conquer tactics don't seem to really work anymore. And what I see more so, I see the divide within the white community, because you have the hardcore Tea Party, the Fox News, the hardcore conservatives, and then you have the progressive whites who know that that white supremacy is the enemy of black people and white people. White supremacy and racism has to die in order for America to live, because it can't survive with both. You've got other countries passing us by, while you got these fools, because Barack Obama is black, they're just not going to vote for anything. So judges can't get confirmed, good laws can't be passed. All these things are happening just because they want to vote for it. Meanwhile, China's building high-speed magnetic levitation, high-speed rails and solar panels, and Brazil is moving forward, and India is moving forward, and you in the United States, they're still talking about racism, something from the 1700s. It's embarrassing, really. And all the things that are put in place is going to leave us in the last place. And that's why I say at this point, that's why I said we got to create our own institutions as a backup. That's why I'm involved in all the types of organizations: the National Bar Association, NAACP, the Urban League, the Black fraternities and sororities, whatever groups. You better have your institutions in place, because as you see, people are getting caught. I don't know if people saw in the news. They're catching all of these people in the woods talking about race war and shooting black people indiscriminately in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And you saw what happened to Marissa Alexander. She got 20 years for shooting a gun in the air. You got Trayvon Martin. These things are all collective. But these are all signs of what's going on. And you got the guy.
These are all reactive signs. They're reacting.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
They're like red flags, So
let's let Audra. Audra's been so quiet. Let's let Audra. Do you have anything to interject?
I wanted to ask Byron, and he could comment as much as he likes, or he could just say yes or no. I just wanted to know, a lot of the things that he has shared were covered in something called the Willie Lynch letter. I'm not sure if he's familiar with that. I'm not sure if he has any validity to that letter. And since you are a law professor, I'm really interested in you addressing if you feel that the Willie Lynch letter is valid. There has been some questioning of its authenticity. How authentic it is.
Right. The first time I heard the Willie Lynch letter was at the Million Man March in 1995. Louis Farrakhan had read it out, but it had been out before that, and it is said to be true. And if it was a slave master named Willie Lynch who put together advice on how to control slaves, and a lot of those things are still in place today. And the reason you would believe it is because it's happened. So I could see if they said, well, here was a letter by Willie Lynch, and then what he said in the letter wasn't what happened afterwards. Then maybe you would doubt it. But the fact that what he said in the letter is everything that happened is proof to it. But one thing I must say is that, again, I think that you have people have been empowered to the point where you can push the black community, but so far. And even the people who are kind of tuned out and just watching Dance with the Stars and playing video games, even they're going to start to realize. I think that was happened with the Trayvon Martin case. I thought was an indication. So,
do you think people really are going to realize?
Pardon?
You think people are really going to realize and wake up? You could call the. I've seen people waking up. I think, because I'm involved in this heavily, I really start to see it with the Gina 6 case. If anyone remembers that, in 2007, where they charged the black boys with attempted murder for a fight because the white kids put a noose on a tree.
Right.
Now, everybody went out there, radio stations. Michael Basin was on top of it. Schools, Compton State University had buses going all the way out there. Tyler Perry was out there, and it really raised some consciousness. And I think that was a civil rights moment, which I think kind of turned into it. From there, you went into next year, we had the Barack Obama election, and 98% of blacks voted for him. You can't get much more unified than that. And then now we've just had a lot of issues with the everybody's had Obama's support. We have supported him. Some people say he could have done some more. But considering the unprecedented opposition he's faced, I think he's doing a great job. But what we see with the Trayvon Martin case, really, for me, I think that kind of turned this moment into maybe a movement. And I don't know what's going to – I know what they're planning on, what the prosecution and everybody are planning on doing. They want to let him walk free. That's what they want. And they're setting it up.
Why do you say that?
This you could just judging from other cases, similar cases, judging on how the Marissa Alexander, she got 20 years, and they let Zimmerman go, and he actually killed somebody. And all she did was shoot a gun in the air, which is really a stand your ground defense. That shows you that it's almost like the first laws that you learn of the first laws from the old days in Virginia in the 1700s of what the slave laws, what applied to the slaves and what applied to non-slaves. It's almost like the same thing. So when you have the same prosecutor, you have them, coming out with this evidence. First of all, they didn't arrest them for days. See, to me, that's overt. That's not institutionalized racism. That's overt and institutionalized racism. And I think that you can, I don't know if they're baiting or if they just basically have kind of lost their minds again. And basically, the institution of white supremacy, it's, a 400-year thing. So to that whole notion, that doesn't go away overnight. And a lot of things have been put in place to make sure to keep it that way. But a lot of those things are fading away. And now when you have the Occupy Wall Street movement, you have everybody starting to feel the same pain that the black community feels every day, a large majority. So unless you can deliver the same pain that they've been inflicting, they don't actually wake up themselves.
Well, let me throw that in here. I don't think they care. I think white people's theory is as long as I'm on the shoulders of somebody else and the other person is deeper in the ditch than me, so be it. They might not like the heat, but I mean, I just don't see it that way. Now, let me add this in. The professor was talking about the birther movement. What bothers me about this whole thing and this, whatever her name is, Orly or whatever, I'm trying to figure out why ain't no lawyer filed a bar complaint against this idiot. She's been all over the nation filing some this, some that. Why hasn't someone stopped her and revoked her license and said, look, you've tried this has been tried in court, this has been litigated, it's been shown you have no merit. Get the heck out. I mean, why not? I don't think a black lawyer can get away with that. Would they, Prof?
Who exactly are you talking about?
The lady that's brought all those lawsuits, Orly Ortiz or whatever her name is, the one that's been filing suit throughout the nation against the president, this birther movement attorney. She's been all over.
Right. If it's a different case, it's not like a double. You can file lawsuits. Luckily, you can file as many lawsuits as you want. But if they're frivolous, they'll be thrown out. And at a certain point, if certain frivolous lawsuits, you yourself could actually get in trouble for making false claims. That's not going to go. The man has been the president for almost 4 years now, and these people, he's made laws and been all over the world, and they're still trying to say he's not wasn't born in the United States. It's almost like the baby crying. I think Chris Rock made a joke. He said what he sees happening in America now is like racism getting ready to go to sleep, meaning like a baby right before when you were a kid, you would throw a temper tantrum when your parents wanted you to go to sleep, and you go crazy. I don't want to go to sleep, and then all of a sudden they come and look, and you're knocked out cold. And he says, I thought that was a pretty good analogy. Saying is that right now this is what we see. The man has been president for 4 years, and he's trying for another 4. Now, of course, they're bringing it up again to hopefully somehow see what's in the mind of the anti-black people out there. Their thought is if Barack Obama becomes president again, he's going to be in a second term, and that's when and I've seen him say things like he's going to give all the goodies out to the blacks. That's what they think is going to happen. So
it probably will. It probably will happen. I can see that happening very, very clearly. Get a second term, set everything up, set the cleanup process in motion, and the second term is where you're going to be no holds barred. If I were president, that's exactly how I would do it. I think he's brilliant in following that protocol. But you know what? That's not anything new. The reason why they're so pissed off is simply because they make the rules of the game. When you learn the rules and you're better at it than they are, then they get pissed off. Okay, well, you know what? Too bad. Too bad.
Right. And, that's good in theory, but as you see, they're catching people every day in these groups, and it's not even a joke. There's these the white supremacist groups have now been tied to, like, the Koch brothers and ALEC, the Stand Your Ground people. See, all of these people are connected. See, it's not that there's a bunch of people running around with hoods on. It's not like that anymore. These white supremacist groups are corporate and all that stuff. And the thing is, where are they getting this financing from? They caught another ones in the woods over there in Disney World, and they were over there planning. When they talk about race war, they're talking about you and me. So, and again, Malcolm X's birthday was yesterday. Another quote he said, and he was a little bit, integration to him was not really the key. The key was more so independence, self-reliance. To me, integration and self-reliance can mean the same thing, but I think it went a little south because once integration happened, everybody left the black-owned stores and ran because they could go downtown and shop in Macy's and Bloomingdale. So
right.
and go in the Marriott and the Hilton. So all the black-owned businesses, a lot closed down. But what he said was, he said it was okay when you asked to drink from the same water fountain as the white man and to sit on the toilet next to the white man. But he said, what will happen when we demand the white man's jobs? Nothing but violence and bloodshed. So as
right.
you see now, you have the economy, some of these jobs are just not coming back. And the education level in the United States, the United States education level, we're like number 20-something in the world. They did a study. They have some kids don't even know. They gave kids, American kids, I think it was 8th graders or high school. It might have been high schoolers. First, they couldn't find a lot of countries on a map, but a lot, like a 30-something% of them, couldn't find the United States on a map.
On a globe, really?
They didn't even know where they were.
Well,
so
you know what you're talking about? You're talking about the globe. Try asking somebody for directions within their same town. Come on.
Right.
It's so ridiculous.
And the point I'm making is that some of these people aren't getting these. They're not qualified for the technological jobs that are coming in. So everybody's fighting now is going to be fighting over the same piece of pie. And we know what happened when that was the case before. That's when the backlash came in with the Ku Klux Klan. The backlash came in with Jim Crow laws. The backlash came in with the Reagan Revolution. It's always a backlash. And, this is kind of like the final conflict being that, the majority every day. You have 4 cities now and the District of Columbia that are majority black and Latino. That's 4 states. Things are changing, and there's a fight for a certain amount of jobs and resources, and that we've definitely got to be aware. You got to be politically astute now. You got to know what's going on, and you got to be alert. Just looking around, what made a lot of people. I always, when people contact me that don't contact me a lot, because